Hizmet as a catalyst for peace, leadership, dialogue, and transnational community. We are delighted to have amongst us our panelists for today, Mrs. Wendy C., Mrs. Karen A. Fetz, Mr. Ahan Satan, and Mr. Emre Tokix. And our moderator for today is Mr. Rainier Herman. Now we'll request the moderator to take over the session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, and welcome everybody to the last session of this wonderful day. And we turn to the topic, Hizmet as a catalyst for peace. Peace is the heart of every true religion, peace among men, peace of one's soul. There is a great Turkish word of huzur, peace of one's soul. So the question will, what does Hizmet and what do the teachings of Mr. Gülen contribute to that? I welcome 4 distinguished panelists, and I will introduce them in the appearance of their speaking. I would like to start with Mrs. Wendy Lawson, a lawyer from South Carolina. She's an experienced practitioner in Christian-Muslim faith dialogue and coordinator for the Turkish-American Intercultural Exchange. Well, and she will talk about servant leadership. Hizmet means service. So we know this servant leadership in Christianity. Does it also apply to the teachings of Mr. Gülen? Wendy?
Yes, you'll find out. The topic of my paper, my book that I'm writing, is servant leadership in Islam. Specifically, the idea of, first, that it's a more Christian-centric idea. Servant leadership sort of became from Christianity. Is it applicable to Islam? And if so, then is Gülen and the Hoca Efendi and the Hizmet Movement, is that a good depiction of servant leadership? I'm going to advance. So the first thing we have is that we have a scholarly problem with this topic of servant leadership because it is almost exclusively a Christian concept. It was created by Robert Greenleaf back in the 70s. He wrote this book about servant leadership. And since that time, it has been expounded on by chiefly Christian writers, either as a way of running the church, the leadership in the church, or as a way of business, Christian businessmen operating in servant leadership. His idea was that if you are a leader, seen as a leader in your community, and you then care more about your people than you do about yourself, then you could become a servant leadership. You'd come on with sorry, the word just, I've got jet lag. Okay. So you would have these character traits that are seen to be by servant leaders. So we have this scholarly problem where, most of the writing is about Christian authors. So we went into this saying, okay, so is servant leadership universal? Does it expand past Christianity? And does it specifically exist in Islam? And then as it does, how does Gülen and the movement compare to that established, all of that scholarly work that sort of establishes this framework of what a servant leadership looks like? And so there has been a little bit of scholarly work in servant leadership in Islam, but it's mostly just Quranic based, where they're just talking about the various traits and where it's found in the Quran, or they are discussing business from a business standpoint. And so let's talk just for a second about what servant leadership is. It really is that you have this, it has to be this inner core inside of you. I kind of don't accept the notion that it's something that can be learned, because I think if you're learning to be a servant leadership, it's not coming from your heart. So I think it has to be within you first. And then they really concentrate on meeting the needs of others rather than their own. So those others might be constituents, They might be employees, they might be your customers, depending upon what aspect you're coming from. And in this case, we would talk about Hizmet, of course, in serving others. We would have the followers of Gulen, who are, of course, he prioritized his followers over himself. And then, of course, then we have the prioritization of society and humanity and the needs of society over his own needs. So I'm preaching to the choir here. Everyone knows Hoji Effendi was almost certainly a servant leader because that's the core of who he was, this love, service of others before yourself as a worship of God. And in Christianity, of course, we start with Jesus, peace be upon him, because, he washed the disciples' feet. He talked about, others have to increase and you have to decrease. And then, of course, he always met the needs of others before he gave his sermons. So he, in ways, servant leadership, and that is Gulen's way as well, because he is meeting the needs of others. The education, the hospitals, the humanitarian relief, the water wells that we do in places, all of those things, you're meeting their physical, intellectual needs, and then there's no proselytizing about it. It's not a conversion, which is unfortunately almost inherent in other faiths' good works. Other faiths have organizations like Hizmet in that they do good works, but they almost exclusively do it for the purposes of conversion, which is antithesis to Hizmet's way of doing it. The Quran specifically talks about what leadership is. It talks about justice and humility. Obviously, humility could have been Gulen's middle name instead of Fethullah. Compassion, trustworthiness, the piousness, the love of Allah, the surrender to Allah, and charity, which of course certainly depicts Hizmet. So I have this analytical framework. So we have, on the Christianity side, we have Jesus and Abraham and Moses. We have those examples of people who served, who led their people, but sort of from behind. But then we have, in Islam, we have the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And then we have, the first caliphs. We have the first, the righteous ones. We have the people who followed him, his companions. We have those people to look to who specifically had those traits when they came into leadership. And then, of course, we have Gulen and the people that have since followed him. And so there are just these traits, this honesty and trustworthiness and integrity from your core, not because you learned it and you're doing it because it will make you look good. We have this idea of charity and compassion, but this idea of seeking lifelong learning. Justice and respect for others, but as you can see at the bottom of the slide, it says love. All the faiths say we're supposed to love our neighbors, our community, and Gulen and Hizmet, love is a verb. In Hizmet, it's a verb. It's not something we are, it's something we do. And that's what brought me to Hizmet was, I met these people who said they wanted world peace, and everyone wants world peace. Even Miss America, when you stick the microphone in her face, she says, I want world peace. Okay, but you don't do anything about it. And so I came to Hizmet very skeptical, but these people who were going to do world peace, and then I started seeing the actions that met the words, these genuine people who had followed this man, and some things that he had to say that were so profound that it influenced them, and by contrast, and it influenced us all, because we were not Turkish, we were not Muslim, but we came to Hizmet because we saw in him and in our fellow Hizmet people this difference that we don't find in other things. So of course, Gulen never wanted to be a leader. I remember sitting there with him, and I accidentally said the Gulen Movement. And he was, well, first of all, he called me the funny one. And of course he said it in Turkish, and I never, they said that's what it meant, but, I'm not so sure. but he would call me the funny one. But he never wanted to be the leader. He never wanted to be the movement. And so that is the key of servant leadership, is that it is not about you. It's not about the house that you live in, the congregation that you have, the plane that you fly in. None of that stuff attached to Glenn. I mean, he was living in that little room with, very, very few possessions. He didn't want anything. He didn't need anything that he did not have. And he eschewed all of that. So this genuine care and concern for others that he just spoke about. And you would think that would not be revolutionary, but it was. And he was, and his teachings are, because the teachings didn't die with him. Even though we've lost him, we have not lost what he put into our hearts. And of course, Hizmet is that. One of the key aspects to servant leadership that I have found in Christianity and in Islam, and then of course in Hizmet, is this idea that we raise up the next generation. So Ibrahim is here he's now in Uganda. So he's not Turkish, okay? He grew up in a Hizmet school, and then he grew up in that influence, the teachings, and he became principal of the school. The servant leader raises up servant leaders. And so that, of course, was typical of Glenn. He didn't say, I want. He would say, we want. He would consult with his companions and get consensus on what would be good. And he might give a suggestion, but then people would run with it and make it something. But he never said, you must, or he just told people what he thought, and if they liked it, they would go do it. And so that's one of the things with Hizmet, is this raising up of the next generation and the next generation and the next generation of people who are now going to continue to take over the institutions. And Hizmet itself inevitably will become less Turkish and even less Muslim, because there will be more and more and more people who are raising up in their own faith traditions that who bring in the teachings of Glenn and then take action upon it. So, obviously we talk about peace and human rights, and we talk about freedom, democracy. That was very, very big with Glenn, is democracy and the freedoms that people enjoy, and that we're going to bring on to the next generation, and we're going to take some of these places where they don't know these things, and we're going to bring it in through education, having children go to school together so that they grow up not fighting each other. Their parents have to talk to each other because the kids are talking to each other, and so we have that. So that's my talk. Obviously the book will be much longer, and inshallah, people will read it. But that's the core of servant leadership, just beyond your own ego to something greater than yourself, in worship of something greater than yourself, and that is universal. And there's no better example than Hoji Effendi and the movement that grew up around him. So, Hizmet, service. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Wendy, for your great talk on portraying Mr. Gülen as a servant leader and what impact that could have on our societies. I would like to turn to Mr. Imre Tokic, in fact, Professor Imre Tokic, President of the Dialogue Platform Associations in Hungary, an eminent promoter of interreligious dialogue and an author of many books, and his book on Jeremiah, I've seen, is a bestseller in very, very many languages. So, Professor Tokic, what does Mr. Gülen and his teaching contribute? Thank you.
It's a great privilege I can be here, and I can talk about Fethullah Gulen, Mr. Fethullah Gulen. If one friend said me half year ago, you will go to India and you will part of the special conference, I didn't believe, I smiled him, but I am here. God has always a miracle, and we are together, and the reason is Fethullah Gulen. We lived a globalized world, globalized religious and cultural diversity. Yeah. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Our world is globalized, religious and cultural diversity represents not only challenge for coexistence, but also can opportunity for dialogue. Dialogue, I think it's most important in the future. He was seeing the future. He was part of the present, but he saw what's going on in the future. He has a vision. For me, the vision is a special for prophetic vision. The prophetic vision comes from the God, not from each other, but from the God. Fethullah Gulen was he prayed a lot of early morning, late morning, midday, afternoon, late afternoon, during the night. And I think this was his secret. It was his secret reason, what he has a vision about the future. Fethullah Gulen was born 1941, 27 of April, in the city of Erzurum. It's a nice city, and this city mainly Sunni Muslim people live there. Gulen well known the preacher as an imam. He became a preacher and poet in 1970s and 1980s, and unfortunately, later on, 1999, he moved from Turkey to the United States because the political situation, it's fighting him. Unfortunately, last year he passed away. Gulen gave public lectures in mosques and public places in Turkey for about 3 decades, 30 years, starting 1916, and he expressed his view in hundreds of newspaper articles, studies, and books. It happened just a couple days ago when I changed the plane because I was flying from Budapest to Istanbul. And on the security system, I put my watches for the special place, and one security man take out my watch, and he looked. Has a writing on the watch, Fethullah Gulen. And I was seeing he is reading. and he was look me from all body, and end of looked me. And I don't know how can I say in English, closed one eyes and smiled, winked, and, oh, mister, can go. I think a lot of people live unvisibly in the Turkey, disappear and follow this movement. I think he has a special vision. Ideas related to education, modernization, good relation with the West, and interfaith dialogue encouraged its growing number of Turkish and other followers from diverse backgrounds to establish new colleges. Gülen recognized the Turkish country's biggest problem. The poor and rich has a big gap, and he wanted to do something for the rich families. And the rich families, I don't know, maybe 90%, and the rich, a poor family, it's 90%, and the rich family, maybe 10%. And I think he was very close to the God, and God has given to him a good advice. How can manage, how can help for the poor people, for the poor families in Turkey. And he invited some rich Turkey people who is really very rich. And he explained to them, I need build a school, a special school for the poor people. Your company made it the doors. Can you give me 200 doors? 200 doors? Yes, I can. The other one asked from the other one, can you give me 500 windows and electrics and bricklayers and pipes and I can imagine what he was feeling when the first school opened and the student with shiny eyes studied and proving, because the poor students has under the limit. They lived under the limit. They need a lot to learn because it's need proving very fast, and they chosen a special teachers. And he said, from 20, 30 teachers, one can able to teach in his center, in his school system. And he built up. In Hungary, we have a very nice book, the Gülen Movement. The author, Helen Rose, about. I was a proofreader. I read maybe 10 times, and I enjoyed every pages. First time, I was sorry. Gülen, he's a very good man. Why not he was born as a Christian? Because I am Christian. Why? And second and third time, I recognized. And I tell my God, oh, I praise you. He was born as a imam, Islam preacher. He was very clever. He was very enthusiastic. And he was very spiritually. This is the reason why he see the future. Unfortunately, we cannot see as he can. We just try follow him. Gülen principles and institutions following his teaching spread in the Turkish-speaking members republics, North America, Asia, Africa, Australia, and the countries of the Middle East. Today, more than 1,000 such schools operate. It's 1,000, maybe 1,500. It's every day changing. His school system growing as a mushroom growing in the forest. But it's good. We need help. We need pray for this school system. And mainly, the student mainly Muslim, but some of Christian and some of Jewish. It's very nice. The civil movement rooted moderate Islam, its purpose to educate young people, promote intercultural dialogue, help to need and promote world peace. And the day after 9/11, at that day I was in Holland and in a special conference. And the early morning, the TV has a break news. And the first time I thought it's not true, it's what's happened. But unfortunately, it was true. Gülen published a full page in the New York Times newspaper condemning the terrorist attacks, claiming that the perpetrators did not respond on the Islamic religion. His message focusing on tolerance and respect for the other draws attention of the need for interreligious dialogue, which can create the bridge between Muslim world and the West including the Christian and the Jewish. We have different religion. I am Christian, and some is Muslim, and some is Jewish. The religion is just way to God. It's not more. Way to God. The goal is closer and closer to God. And our religion just a tool, it's an equipment. And every day he was closer and closer the Creator, the God, only the one God. Gülen's most important teaching in the interreligious dialogue, that's why we are here together today. Gülen has a strong influence. How many continents we are coming? And the reason just Effendi Hoxha Gülen. He was a very nice person. Unfortunately, personally, it's true. It's true. I not met with him, but in spiritually I met. If the new heaven will come, and if I will part of this world, I will go to him and I will shake his hand and I will congratulate him and I ask him, can we pray together? And I think he can. My dream, the future vision, just silent. 3 young boys playing soccer, football. One Jewish, one Christian. What do you think? What is the third? Muslim. And the Jewish leg hearted and cry and lay down. My vision, a Christian and Muslim will go to their friends, help him and heal him and cry with him. If the future, our dream, is fulfilled, we need not afraid from the future, because the future is nicer than we think now. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Tokic, for your great synopsis of the thinking and teaching of Mr. Gill, and also for your question, why hasn't he been born as a Christian? I also could ask that. I'm a Christian by myself, and you gave the answer, because no religion is better than the others, and all ways are leading up to God. So let's work that our visions become true. I'm turning now to Professor Karen Festi. She's professor at University of Denver, a place we all would like to live, and at the Joseph Curwell School of International Studies, and her research is focusing on conflict resolution. For example, how peace can be built by dialogue. There are so many approaches. Could you please give us some insight in your research, and also, as I was told, you would like to talk about the chances to bring the violence and the wars in the Middle East, Palestine, to an end. The floor is yours, Professor Fester.
Good afternoon, everyone. The end of the day. Long time. My slides. First thing I did was select the background. It's purple. You know what that means? It's a combination of red and blue. And if you're an American, you know what it means to be red. That's MAGA, that's Mr. Trump. And blue is the democratic liberal order. All right, so you combine them together. Now, the other thing, if you look closely at the background here, you see these circles. They're randomly placed. They're of different sizes. Well, I'm going to talk about physics today. Particle physics, about which I know virtually nothing, but it's connected with dialogue, as I'll show you in a moment. I have a big topic here, a big topic: peace-building dialogue, reconciliation, interfaith discussion, intractable conflict, and then I threw in AI, because this is the era of AI contributions. This one? So, I'm going to get with the claim about dialogue. I've heard it all day, and it's the following. We all know that dialogue is serious, honest, verbal communications between people. Its purpose, I've listed 4 arguments here: to build mutual understanding and tolerance, to close gaps of social and political polarization, to enhance feelings of inspirational and invigorating group vibrancy, and to encourage smooth relations in today's interconnected world in which there's a lot of fragmentation. How about evaluating the claim? Now, here is my research, mainly from last summer, where I was looking for documented evidence of these 4 claims. It's a mix, to be honest. But a peace-building consensus and I've heard it all day here at this conference, believes that dialogue through either formal third-party mediation for political conflict resolution and informal grassroots movements for interfaith gatherings are important, supportive elements in building attitudes of peaceful coexistence. But as others who have tried to evaluate the claim have said, this is hard to gauge. It's based on the following premises. It's the way I analyze it. First is that you can move from a state of hostility to a state of harmony through dialogue. Dialogue is the conduit, it's the mechanism. Reconciliation dialogue between former adversaries is grounded in the participation hypothesis made very famous by Habermas, that people engaged in discussion with the other to create consensus become committed to a shared outcome for the common good. Interfaith dialogue has a different premise, which is that it's grounded in the contact hypothesis, one of the most famous hypotheses in American sociology dealing with integration between blacks and whites, published first in the 1950s. It's known as the contact hypothesis, that people meeting the other to share stories and interests to reduce misperceptions can find mutual understanding, common ground. So in other words, dialogue has two-form purpose, common good and common ground. So what I want to speak about here this afternoon is a few more comments about dialogue foundations. First of all, the contemporary dialogue paradigm. That's where physics comes in. Secondly, the specific objectives of a dialogue. I count 6. And third, the philosophical assumptions necessary to make peace-building dialogue work. Then a few words about its application. Within reconciliation, I'll talk about, just very briefly, requirements for successful outcomes. Interfaith dialogue, I'm going to talk about 2 parts of the Abrahamic religion, Islam-Christian relations and Christian-Jewish relations. And then thirdly, intractable conflict. I just selected one that seems pretty common in this genre, the Israeli-Palestinian dispute. And then I'll close by talking about some prospects about AI, artificial intelligence, and augmented intelligence tools. So the contemporary dialogue paradigm was created by a quantum theoretic physicist. Most of you probably know this. His name, David Bohm. And he starts out talking about how matter and particles operate in the universe, and wrote an article in the end of the 80s, I think maybe 1990, about how mind operates in the same way. He had this theory that there's an implicate order that you can't see, and that implicate order leads to the explicate order, which is observable. So in physics, the implicate order is the particle behavior of matter. In the social life, the implicate order is beliefs, thoughts, and prejudices of the human mind. Those are things that create the explicate order. The implicate order, however, is fluid. It's changing. People can have very negative attitudes, and they can be revised to become less animus towards others. It enfolds into the explicate order, which, as I said, is observable. And in order to bring about social change, you have to change the explicate order. But to do that, you have to change the implicate order, and that's dialogue. Dialogue is a method for changing the implicate order by collective thinking, for collective learning, for collective action, for social change. 4 pieces. If you want to change the world, it starts with what's inside the head, and you've got to have expression about this in a safe environment. That's the collective thinking, collective learning, collective action for social change. So the functions of a dialogue, according to Bohm and his associates, were to explore the roots of human crisis, the fragmentation, to observe people's hidden values and intentions, to recognize the puzzles of incoherence in mind, to see how feelings, emotions, thoughts, and desires function, and to allow collective learning and expanded harmony in social life. He made applications of this notion of his dialogue he was very excited about. In Ojai, California, he ran seminars from the mid-'80s until he died in 1992. It was picked up at MIT by the Sloan Management School in their dialogue project that operated from the early 90s and continues to this day in corporate business, in service sectors like hospitals and community forums. It's very well known. I've listed some of Boehm's books here that were all published posthumously based on his lectures. Thought as a System, On Dialogue, The Limits of Thought, Wholeness and the Implicit Order, and a couple of MIT books that are wide sellers, The Fifth Dimension and Dialogue of the Art of Thinking Together. So, turning now to the specifics of a dialogue, I take this from a logician, a communication theory logician, mathematics. He was kind of a Renaissance guy. Okay, Doug Walton is his name, and he evaluated different formats for considering what constitutes a dialogue. I've kind of briefed his assessment here because he said we joined everything together saying dialogue, and we know what it means. No, he said they're very specific things. They can range from information seeking, where you have groups of people coming together. They have knowledge, but they seek more information, and the dialogue ends then when they have a satisfactory exchange. That's one of the functions of, I think, the Hizmet dialogue processes. Then he talks about inquiry dialogue, where you need proof of a situation that it actually exists. You can just read it here. And when that proof is satisfied, you've finished the dialogue. Discovery, you need a more detailed explanation of a situation. And then we have persuasion, which is the more common form in which it's used, and deliberation, and at last negotiation. We often think of dialogue at the bottom of the list here. You know, people are getting together in order to make an action agreement that satisfies both sides. But it has many other purposes. And this is very important, as he says, because there's a danger when dialogues don't work. And many times they don't work in many situations. If you shift, if you come in to a setup thinking this is going to be a discovery dialogue, and suddenly one party said, no, we're going to negotiate, make a deal here. Okay, there's a danger in doing that because you haven't finished out the purpose of the original reason for coming together. So that's my example. A party may decide to move from persuasion to negotiation, but this blocks the road to agreement, actually. So the recommendation is you have to monitor the flow and stay in the lane, so to speak, so you don't move ahead too quickly. The tendency for people who are in a form of hostility situation, they want to move quickly. Well, this is a slow process. It's hard to do that. Finish the objective before moving ahead. The other thing I'll mention here is the format on dialogue phrases developed by Jay Rothman back in the 90s. He calls it the aria method. Those of you in music know what this means. And his notion is a dialogue should begin between parties who are in some kind of opposition, and they should have an antagonistic phrase where they can argue, they can fight. They don't have to be calm and peaceful. They have to be honest, stay straightforward. This is why I hate you. And this is why you may hate me, and we get that out on the table, then we clean that up. Now, sometimes he says dialogues end right there because everybody leaves angry. But if they're okay going to phase 2, it's resonance. I'll be in your shoes, you be in my shoes. He's done this with Palestinians and Israelis. You know, he tells a Palestinian, he tells an Israeli, could pretend you're a Palestinian, he tells it to the other side. At the end of one of the dialogues, as I know Jay Rothman, you know, the Palestinian said to the Israeli, you make my case better than I do. Okay, that's the resonance part. Well, if you can finish that, then you can move into invention and action. Because one of the criticisms of dialogue is they never move to those last steps. They're thinking social change, collective thinking, collective learning, collective action, social change, but they don't always end there. So he thinks that's an important part of ending it. Okay, let me move on to another part of my sort of agenda building here is the philosophical assumptions about dialogue for peace. This is, I think, very critical. There are two different assumptions about whether you can allow or make possible the seemingly impossible of cooperation between different groups. It's known as the value commensurability or the value incommensurability issue. Plato developed the utilitarian method of valuation. Everything is fungible, it's quantifiable, it's transferable on a universal scale. Monies, utilities, goods. That's the conflict resolution mantra. We believe it very strongly, all of us who are in the peace business. We think negotiation and dialogue for peace is possible. We don't challenge it. But there's another side, the value incommensurability position. And that's Levinas, who is a French-Lithuanian continental philosopher of recent times. And he said, no, personal beliefs about what is meaningful and important can't be reduced to a measurable exchange to approximate equal value. Sounds like the Palestinian, Israeli problem here. You can't do that in all circumstances, he argues, that some black and white will simply remain that keep parties apart. These are the intractable conflict issues. And Levinas says, in this case, you'll have interminable negotiations. They'll be small and tiny. They will never solve the basic issue of value. So there's two things we need to recognize in the dialogue for peace, that not everybody in every case thinks about the way of commensurability. Some think it's not possible. Okay, so let me move now into the three different formats of talking about how dialogue could apply. And on this slide, I simply show you in post-war reconciliation dialogues, which only became popular in the post-Cold War period, only since 1990s or thereabouts. The success factors, if they work, like sort of worked in Bosnia, sort of worked in Cambodia. I mean, these are like always sort of worked, but they're moving upward. First of all, the absence of a radical disagreement between disputants. The value incommensurability problem doesn't really exist. It's more of the utilitarian model that works. Secondly, the appropriate engagements for dialogue participants. These are things that people need training to do because we're not naturally born this way, sad to say. And there's these 4 points that is mentioned in the Bohm dialogue and so forth. Speaking with others with authentic voice. You have to be not only honest, you have to be vulnerable. You have to open up yourself. You have to listen to others for the deep understanding, and you can only do that if you're vulnerable yourself. You have to respect others with dignity and suspend personal assumptions. No judgment. A collective thinking process will lead to consensus solutions if everybody is participating with this orientation. And then the collective learning, as I've said it, already can lead to action, and that can lead to social change. It's very slow. You need a big support structure to do this. Example is the Nansen centers in Bosnia that the Norwegians sent up, back in 1995, and they had them all over, about 6 areas in the country, so that anybody, children on up through seniors, could come in to say, I've got a little issue, can we solve this? So they were like constantly functioning. It's still in existence. I have no closing time here, but it's piece by piece by piece, and that's a very important piece to remember in this process. And of course, it was very costly to have these centers and to have people there as support structures all the time. Okay, now let me turn to the interfaith dialogue in particular. Some of you may know this very famous statement by the Swiss Catholic theologian Hans Kuhn. I'm sorry I forgot the umlaut over the U there, that he said in 1986. No peace among the nations without peace among the religions. No peace among the religions without dialogue between the religions. No dialogue between the religions without investigation of foundations of the religions. 2 dialogue formats have been presented for evaluation, but I'm only going to talk about a more current one today, which only came out about 5 years ago by a guy named Melnick. He said, when you're going to look at interfaith dialogue, you have 4 different criteria. What is the intention? With respect to intention, he said, we have to look at, are you wondering who is right? That's, superiority or inferiority orientation. Who are you? That's cognitive learning. How can we live together? The peace plans. How can we improve the world together? 4 different kinds of intentions. Goals, he said, in an interfaith dialogue, what does the group want to achieve? What are the principles? And then who are the participants? Are they mainly spiritual leaders? Are they interested citizens? So this format, I've decided to look at 2 of the binaries, the Islam Christian and then the Christian Jewish. Now, a book I read recently said the disaster of war is what leads to interfaith initiatives. So taking that literally, I decided, okay, how does that apply in these 2 cases? Well, as you know, the defeat of the Ottoman Empire in World War I, then a civil war, and the creation of the Republic of Turkey, a secular regime for nationalism and modernity. There was a ban on Islamic practices. Call to prayer was abandoned. No traditional dress. No more religious education. A lot of the Islamic scholars left. They left the area. Turkey was seen as a lost cause. The rise of Said Nusri, who some of you mentioned, who brought a new philosophy, which is that religion and science combined. It's not either or, it's not choose one. It's combine them, coexistence. His follower, as we have noted, is Fethullah Gulen, who was a Nursi, wrote a collection called The Advocate of Dialogue, and this constructed the basis of the dialogues around the world, that science and religion coexist. It became very popular in America in post 9/11, where Americans were very concerned with, why did all these Muslims decided to attack the U.S.? The Muslims everybody was grouped together. There was no difference about them, but here were the Gulen societies that were ready and willing and very eager to, work with them, and I think that contribute to, a big part of the success. Okay, so what, if I just have to summarize the 4 points here, okay. The intention of these dialogues are to avoid polemical exchange of superiority, become acquainted with the other, cognitive understanding, seek peaceful coexistence, and no theological debate on doctrinal differences. Now, they're important. In Christianity, Jesus is the Son of God. And in Islam, he's a prophet. That's a huge, huge difference. But the orientation is avoid all of this. Principles for Muslim seeking ethical life and righteous, pious behavior. The personal peace orientation. If everybody applied personal peace, we'd have world peace. For Christians, it's quite different. They want a division between religion and politics because they think these norms should be separate. So they're interested also in country peace, and they're concerned about some Islamic states that use those principles to run their politics. The goals build a spiritual sense of unity and friendship, and the form is public gatherings of interested, committed citizens in a grassroots effort. Let me turn to this one, which is very different, the Christian Jewish. Again, the disaster of war leads to interfaith initiative. Defeat of the Nazis in World War II and the recognition of the Holocaust, 6 million European Jews were killed by the regime that was acknowledged acknowledgement of the Christian doctrine of deicide, i.e., God-killing and Jewish youth. There's, in the New Testament, in the Christian Bible, Matthew 27:25, which states the following: "Let his blood be on us and on our children." That's after Jesus was first claimed the King of the Jews. Then the supporters went fickle and they said, "Crucify him, crucify him." Pontius Pilate said no, and that's when the people said, "Let his blood be on us." That then was incorporated. This, I had no idea. I was just stunned by this. And I have a Christian background, but it's Protestant. This was Catholic theology. There was this led rise to anti-Semitism, that the Jews committed deicide. They killed God, and they had to carry that guilt forever. That's Matthew 27:25. So these two, anti-Semitism was fueled into Nazi fascism. 1946, there was the first meeting of International Council of Christians and Jews. It was mainly Protestant and Jewish theologians. 1947, the declaration was issued by this group. Jews should not be regarded as enemies of Christianity. Deicide and Jewish guilt doctrine should be abolished. 1947, 2 years after the Holocaust, that was stated because anti-Semitism was continuing. It wasn't until 1965, the Roman Catholic Church Vatican Council II issued Nostra Aetate, Latin, which means in our time. Deicide and Jewish guilt doctrine should be abolished. Interfaith dialogue should be encouraged. That's when the Catholics set up the interfaith format that they had, which is different when I presented. But it wasn't until Y2K, year 2000, the Jewish responded to this with Dabru Emet, which means speak truth, which is Jews and Christian worship the same God, accept the same moral principles. Parties should work together for peace and justice. So the intention in this dialogue is to determine who was right. The Christians always felt they were superior. And historically, they did this. They discriminated heavily. And after World War II, then the center was to eliminate anti-Semitism and build peaceful coexistence. So here, the goals have been joint projects, quite a few of them, such as the U.S. Civil Rights Movement. Principles are: Christians sought forgiveness for repressing Jewish people. Jews have sought non-discrimination. The form is very often meeting of spiritual leaders. That's the more common format, which in the other one is more of a grassroots-oriented, process. Okay. So assessment here. Right. 90 seconds. All right. Assessment of interfaith dialogue in the 21st century. You have an expansion, Christian, Islam, Jewish dialogues. 3 Abrahamic faiths. Gulen societies around the world. There are other centers in Baltimore, Maryland, in Doha, Qatar, in Vienna, and in Israel. In fact, Israel is saturated with all these dialogues, but they seem to make very little difference when it comes to conflict. A couple of scholars here, one article states that proponents rely on untested assumptions, ungrounded ideas of how their efforts will bring social change. These groups need to go beyond social cohesion. They need to make plans for social change. A rabbi said, I've been active in interfaith dialogue for 30 years. We always say we affirm mutual understanding, tolerance, and dialogue. It's an empty phrase. But he said sometimes somebody gets excited about their faith and why their faith is different, and that's the exciting part of it. A recent evaluation of dialogues between Christians and Muslims in Jordan, and they made a really big effort here. It produced 0 attitude change. No Muslims changed attitude, no Christians changed attitude. But people who normally didn't meet, met, but that's all that happened. An article in 2025 said, maybe we should forget about social change and interfaith dialogue and just focus on religious responsibility, spiritual solidarity, not social change. Okay. I don't have time to talk about the intractable conflict and dialogue. I'm going to have to forego that. I'm happy to send you my slides or a copy of my paper and how everybody got involved in this attitude, so I'm going through here very quickly. Dialogue fails when you don't have commitment among leadership on both sides to get a change. And when you violate dialogue rules, people bluff, they lie, they don't speak with authentic voice. When the dialogue objective shifts from persuasion to negotiation, parties aren't ready. And when you have value incrementability, it's not going to work at any time in any case. And I have closing statements about AI, and the last thing I'm going to say about is that, dialogue for peace is about attitude change. It's about a shift in human feelings, moving from conflict into cooperation and harmony. Machines can help find, disputants' attitudes, policy positions. They can generate proposals. But this depends on the AI source library, which in our field is very, very weak. Everything we want, it's virtually not there. These are some documents for how you would get that, and we don't have most of this stuff in machine-readable form. We're so limited. So I get upset when I hear hype, hype, hype about AI because it is not the resolution. I ask them, how would you solve the Israeli-Palestinian problem? Guess what? It's what I already knew. It's got value incommensurability. We can't do anything about it. So I have a wish list, and my final statement here. Peace-building dialogue is difficult, it's slow, it's prone to fail. It's very useful for confronting religion in post-war crisis environments. It's not effective for social change. We still have attitudes and the persistence of these negativities. It's very good for social cohesion, and I admire all the things that the Hizmet movement is doing. Last, you can see artificial intelligence is oversold. It's based on potential. There's very little that we can get out of it right now. The augmented intelligence was just have computers constructing theoretic formulas that we can look at, and that's wise.
Thank you so much for your very scholarly framework, what dialogue is, what it's not, what it can achieve, what it cannot, and how impossible dialogue for peace is. It should have been a lecture by its own, and I certainly would like to read the full paper. The word is now, now I invite Ayhan Çetin to talk about his issue. He asked the question, how, when the Hizmet movement is becoming a transnational civil society movement, how do non-Turkish participants see themselves? How are they seen? Are they invited? Are they co-owners? And so on.
Yeah,
it's yours. The word is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm honored and privileged to be the last speaker of the day. And I think I deserve a big round of applause for that. Thank you. My name is Ayhan. I'm coming from South Africa. I'm the director of one of the Hizmet affiliated institutions. So I am more practitioner than the academic, actually. So being a practitioner in the Hizmet context in Southern Africa, I've been dealing with around 10, 11 countries. So I work with the Hizmet institutions and the people who are actively part of the Hizmet movement in Southern Africa. So by saying that, I've been observing significant change in the demographic and the institutional, structure of the Hizmet movement in Southern Africa. I'm sure you can guess why, because of, political operation in Turkey and the long arms of, the authorities in Turkey. Unfortunately, many of the Turkish origin Hizmet people, they had to leave the countries that they were serving. So as a result, the visibility and the responsibility of non-Turkish, particularly local African participants, their visibility increased remarkably. And these individuals are no longer peripheral actors. They are now central to the daily functioning and the continuity and the public representation of the Hizmet initiatives in Southern Africa. So this transformation raised a set of questions for me as a practitioner in the Hizmet context, and how Hizmet identity being shaped among non-Turkish participants. This was the first one. And how do they understand themselves within the movement? And what form of belonging, ownership, and the responsibility do they experience? So it was this lived tension between expanding participation and evolving identity that motivated me to undertake this research. So this is not only analytical, also a kind of reflective study for me. And the other reason, actually, I wanted to do this research, because when you look at the literature about Hizmet movement, and usually you find, and the literature still assumes leadership, Turkish leadership as a normative in the movement, Turkish cultural memory as central, and the non-Turkish actors as recipients rather than the agents. So I want to seek and invert the gaze of this perspective, and by centering non-Turkish voices and treating them not as extensions of the movement, but as co-constitutive subjects. So there were two questions I focused on, as briefly mentioned in the beginning. How do non-Turkish participants understand and relate to Hizmet's cultural, spiritual, and organizational identity? Do they experience themselves as the co-owners or invited guests in the movement? And how are their voice heard, their cultural and intellectual contributions acknowledged or contested in the movement? So the methodology said, so there were 15 people. I conducted, I think, 11 interviews with 15 non-Turkish African participants. And interestingly, 4 of them were non-Muslims, actively being part of Hizmet movement at the institutions of the Hizmet. And they were teachers, coordinators, and the senior figures in the movement. And their experience and participation in the movement between 3 and 20 years. So I'm just going to talk about, what I found from these interviews. So across all interviews, participants articulated a strikingly consistent understanding of Hizmet as a moral and ethical project rather than an ethnic, national, or culturally Turkish movement. So this was quite significant. And Hizmet was repeatedly described as a way of life, a moral compass, or a practice of service, rather than as an organization tied to Anatolian history and Turkish identity. So participants overwhelmingly framed Hizmet through concepts such as living for others, serving humanity for the sake of God, and reviving the prophetic ethic in the contemporary life. And importantly, this ethical framing was not abstract. So interviews consistently connecting all these values and the principles of the Hizmet movement in their lives and their own realities. And many described how Hizmet reshaped their daily conduct, professional ethics, and the interpersonal relationship. And one of them said, I quote, "When you read Hoca Efendi's book, you don't only get religion or philosophy. You get a wider perception of the world. It affects how you speak, how you argue, and how you live. End of quote. And a key empirical pattern is what may be described as vernacularization. Participants actively translated all these Hizmet principles and the values in their own cultural and social context. And it shows that they are passively, they didn't adapt all these values in their own lives. So my African friends, they will, and maybe some of you know about the Ubuntu philosophy in Africa. And they were repeatedly talking about Ubuntu and the connection with Ubuntu and the Hizmet values. And one of them said, in Africa, I am because we are. That is exactly what Hizmet teaches, living for others, not for yourself. So this synthesis indicates that for non-Turkish participants, Hizmet identity is uprooted. So its moral authority no longer derives from the Turkish origins, but its local ethical resonance and the practical usefulness in addressing social challenges in their own communities, such as inequality, quality education, or moral formation. So this is the key finding for my question 1. So non-Turkish participants internalize Hizmet as a universal ethical praxis rather than a culturally specific movement originated from Turkey. Hizmet's identity as lived in Southern Africa is morally indigenous, spiritually meaningful, and professionally formative. At that level of values and meaning, Hizmet is already experienced as theirs. So, while moral and emotional identification with Hizmet was consistently strong, participants' accounts revealed a more ambivalent and layered experience of belonging and ownership. None of the interviews described themselves as outsiders, yet few articulated an unqualified sense of being full institutional co-owners of the movement. Recurring distinctions emerged from these interviews between relational belonging and the institutional ownership. On the relational level, participants described Hizmet spaces, particularly where they, active, like dormitories, school settings, very familial and deeply meaningful. One of them said, "These brothers became my family. I trust them more than my own relatives. That is why I am here." However, this sense of emotional inclusion often did not translate into confidence about one's place in the movement's long-term future. Several participants described themselves as contributors or implementers, rather than co-authors of Hizmet's vision. And one of them said, I quote, "I feel that I am doing Hizmet, yet yes, but to say that I am fully part of the Hizmet, maybe 70 or 75%. So this notion of partial belonging serves as an important diagnostic marker. It reflects not alienation, but institutional liminality. Participants are inside the movement, trusted in daily responsibilities, yet uncertain about their influence over strategic vision, leadership trajectories, and institutional memory. And they also described as a family, home, a place of trust and sacrifice. Yet at the same time, many felt absent from the movement's long-term imagination. Notably, even participants who expressed gratitude, loyalty, and the long-term commitment acknowledged that Hizmet could continue without them, suggesting a limited sense of structural indispensability.
even if only 10 minutes of your time is
Gone.
gone, I have to interrupt you because on the outside the class and their teacher are waiting to go inside for their class. So I would like, I wasn't aware of that, I was just informed.
Okay, but it took almost 12, 13 hours to, come here from South
Yeah, I
Africa.
know.
Long way. I paid too much money, and you are, taking my time. No, I'm joking. Okay,
I don't know, but how did you agree
5
with them
minutes?
outside?
You are just the messenger.
Okay, so let's finish and then we don't have any Q&A
okay.
and then we have to stop it like that.
Okay, just
So
5 minutes.
5 more minutes, yes?
Yes.
Fif-
Yes,
fif-
I'll finish.
Okay.
Promise. Yes, so they feel at home, but they are not owner of the home. They don't feel the ownership of the home. Okay, so I'm just deciding what to talk. Okay, in terms of their voice, if their voice are heard or not. So the third major finding concerns how participants' cultural and intellectual contributions are recognized and integrated within the movement, and in daily operational, work of the Hizmet movement locally, yes, because they are local, they know everything about the local dynamics, and when they suggest something about, the daily operations of the, the Hizmet activities, yes, they are valued, their suggestions are implemented. But in terms of, again, coming to the bigger programs and what needs a kind of direction, so there is a very limited consultation with them. Okay, I can just jump to the conclusion quickly. Yeah, okay, so the metaphor of unfolding the tent, so it was my metaphor for this research, whether the tent is unfolded or not, and how this tent was structured. So unfolding the tent captures both achievements and the challenge. Hizmet has succeeded in expanding its moral and human reach across the borders. Its unfinished task lies in the translating that moral universality into institutional practices that reflect mutual trust, distributed authority, and the true co-ownership. I think how this tension is navigated will significantly shape the Hizmet's long-term resilience, credibility, and the ethical resonance as a true transnational civic society movement. Thank you very much.
I would have loved to give overtime, but the situation does not allow that. It was a very lively presentation, but I would have loved also the discussion. I'm so sorry, but if we stick to our values, we have to give that class the chance now to come into here and to have their lesson. So thank you very much. Give again the panelists a big hand and a big applause.
Today here and made a really pleasant panel discussions for us, and we are really grateful to have you here in campus. Thank you everyone, and now we all can head out, that we can end the day here, and tomorrow we'll have a fresh day. Thank you so much.